Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's feeling okay, and certainly if you don't feel up to listening to me talk for about the next 50 minutes or so, by all means, you can rest easy or do something else. But certainly, today's subject matter is pretty important. Again, my name is Eric Berman. I'm a partner with Eide Bailly. Let's talk about the GASB's Note Disclosure Exposure Draft. This is a little different than other GASB exposure drafts because it's an exposure draft for a concept statement. And I'll talk about the role of concept statements in a little bit. Again, my name is Eric Berman, and if you have questions about this, please feel free to email me or call me at any time. For the next 50 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking about the current landscape of note disclosure for states and local governments, the important role of GASB concept statements and what the GASB is proposing, and next steps you can think about, and hopefully some time for your questions as always. So, of the 6 concept statements issued by the GASB, why did it go forward? Let's go back one slide. Come on, Nanette, hold on. All right, there we go. Of the 6 concept statements issued by the GASB to date, among the most important is GASB Concept Statement number 3, and I bet it's among the most important statements that you've never heard about. And it's because it's a concept statement. It's not a regular GASB statement. Concept statement number 3, or communication methods and general purpose external financial reports that contain basic financial statements, has among other aspects the addressing of communication methods to users of financial statements. Concepts 3 clarifies the relationship of basic financial statements, the notes to basic financial statements, and supporting information presented with basic financial statements within your external financial report. Essentially, how everything you do all relates to each other. It provides a conceptual basis for selecting which communication method to present which item of information within the financial reports that contain the basic financial statements, how everything all interrelates. These communication methods include when to recognize things in basic financial statements, what items are in disclosure, in the notes to the basic financial statements, what items are presented as required supplementary information, and if you prepare a CAFR or something similar, what items are presented as supplementary information but are not required by the GASB. Each of these communication methods is defined within the concept statement, and criteria is contained within Concepts 3 to help the GASB, or in the absence of any other guidance, the preparer of a financial report to determine what is the appropriate method to use to communicate an item of information. Using a consistent approach in the selection of communication methods benefits users in understanding location and nature of information in our financial reports. Concept statement number 3 also addresses the necessary elements of how communication is effective and how it's relevant and what are the reliable messages within financial reports. This includes a clarification of the roles and responsibilities of the preparer of the financial report, the users of the financial report, and the GASB for communicating information. Now, as we all know, the most consistent form of communication that we have to whoever's using our financial statements is our annual financial report, or sometimes called the general purpose external financial report. GASB freely admits that no single annual financial report is enough to communicate every possible need. After all our users are varied. We actually don't even know who 100% our users are. Therefore, governments not only publish the basic financial statements, but other tools as well as including things like budgetary documents within the annual financial report, the notes to the basic financial statements, and supporting information, including the RSI, the required supplementary information that is within GASB statements. I mentioned the word users, and the GASB has identified since early in its existence 3 groups as the primary users of general purpose external financial reports. Those include those to whom the government is primarily accountable. And for those of you who are in governments, you know those folks as the citizens in your jurisdiction. The second group is those who directly represent the citizens, and those are your legislative body or whoever is your oversight body. And the third group is those who lend or who participate in the lending process, and that includes your bondholders. The central means of communicating to all these groups are our annual financial reports, and that's why our annual reports are so important. Annual financial reports can also be in the form of special purpose frameworks, and in many of our jurisdictions that we serve, they utilize special purpose frameworks, also known as SPFs, as allowed by your state or local laws, regulations, and similar. To satisfy accountability, even in a special purpose framework, relative GASB disclosure in the form of notes and other disclosure is required. The auditor's reports for your annual financial report are modified to show that the users of the financial reports, that the annual reports are not presented in accordance with GAAP, but are presented in compliance with the special purpose framework. So if you happen to use a cash basis or maybe a modified cash basis annual report, that's perfectly okay, as long as the report shows that it's not in accordance with GAAP, but is in accordance with the special purpose framework, and it has notes to support the information in the financial statements. The purpose of the notes has always been to support the information in the financial statements. The financial statements and the notes are indeed 2 separate forms of communication. Each is a financial reporting construct used to convey information to our users. And as we know, the financial statements have numbers in them. They're quantitative. And the notes are mainly qualitative, but contain disaggregated quantitative information supporting the information in the financial statements. As an example, the capital assets and debt footnotes contain far more information than what is presented on the face of the financial statements. This shows how all of our information is related. It shows the roles of financial reporting and general purpose in the general purpose external financial reports in providing information that is used to assess accountability and to make decisions. The figure shows the relationship between the basic financial statements, the notes to the basic financial statements, and the supporting information that is presented with the basic financial statements within a general purpose external financial report. Other general purpose external financial reports may be used to meet the common needs of users for other information that is necessary to assess accountability and to make decisions. Information presented in other general purpose reports may or may not have a clear and direct relationship to the information presented in the reports that contain the basic financial statements, the notes, and other supporting information. The lower left-hand corner of the screen shows the importance of what we do every single day to develop the basic financial statements and the notes. These are the key elements to our financial reports. And again, they include things like our annual reports, even popular reports such as those submitted to the AGA or to the GFOA, and other separate reports such as budgetary reports, bond offering statements, single audit reports. These are very important. The other information contains all other forms of communication beyond annual financial report. In this other information, which is on the right-hand side, This may include everything on your website, investor-focused information such as rating agency presentations and even social media. Yes, folks, your Facebook page is a form of communication, and thank goodness it's not audited. But as we have come to learn in many cases the hard way, the content on it can be a form of accountability. And as we're told many times over, what you post can come back and haunt you well into the future. And so that is a form of accountability. The role of the notes can't be underestimated due to the positioning as the cornerstone of our external financial report, as the second most important piece of communicating to our stakeholders. But in many ways, we overlook the role of the notes. We just copy forward from last year to this year. I know you do it because I used to be a preparer too, and guess what I used to do? I used to copy forward from the prior year to the current year. We don't have enough time to take an hour just to read the notes from last year before we get started on this year's audit to see if there are any changes or ways that we can clarify them for those who may just so happen to read them. In some ways, the language that floats from year to year is generic or boilerplate. After all, how many of you have changed the description of your government-wide financial statements since the issuance of GASB 34 over 20 years ago? I can see all of your hands, not many of us. Even worse, there have been plenty of notes that either I have read as an auditor or prepared as a preparer that I have copied from other governments. Yes, me, I have done that. I have sinned. How many among us has copied from another government and forgotten to change the name? In the spirit of full disclosure, I did that as a preparer until my boss read the note and said, Eric, we're not in the state of New York. And then we have the constant complaint to GASB on the notes. We've all said it. Gee, what's the matter with you, GASB? You haven't met a note that you don't like. Well, this concept statement that the GASB is proposing attempts to start to change the course of those issues in many more things. There is an established hierarchy that is out there in terms of how we communicate to our stakeholders. And the hierarchy is on this screen. The first decision is on a note, is it required to be recognized? Or is the element or the transaction required to be recognized in the basic financial statements in accordance with GAAP? If the answer is yes, then the transaction is recognized, but then it must also be explained as required in the notes. The second step is it required disclosure in the notes? And in some cases, not in the basic financial statements. And this encompasses things like encumbrances, which many of us use, and similar commitments that are not accrued. Tax abatement disclosures is a good example of this. In the summary of significant accounting policies, among many other things. And if not, step 3, is it supplementary information required by the GASB? And this information may be aggregated in the basic financial statements, or in the case of ratio analysis, or maybe even the modified approach to infrastructure condition disclosure, not even presented in the basic financial statements. The required notes to the RSI also are not part of note disclosure. RSI is deemed essential by the GASB for placing information in the basic financial statements and in the notes in an appropriate operational, economic, or historical context. Must have a clear and demonstrable relationship to the basic financial statements or notes. And it includes analysis of known facts and conditions. But it is not supposed to have subjective assessments, predictions, and similar. That's why RSI is very limited. And lately, we've been really coming to terms with RSI, especially with our pension and OPEB disclosure. But there's always been other RSI disclosure for many other purposes. If it's not in those levels, the fourth step is it supplementary information? Supplementary information contains information that is useful for placing basic financial statements and the notes to the basic financial statements in an appropriate operational, economic, or historical context. So it's almost like RSI. Although in the case of supplementary information, the GASB does not require it to be presented. Preparers of governmental financial reports elect to present SI, or in some cases are required by law or regulations to present SI with their basic financial statements, notes to the basic financial statements in RSI. If they're required to do so, they follow any applicable GASB issued or GASB cleared guidance regarding the format and content of that information. We know SI better for most of us as combining statements and CAFRs and other supporting information in CAFRs as well. So for example, for defined benefit plans out there, pensions and OPEB, supporting information is presented, which is required if you prepare a CAFR. And that supporting information includes things like actuarial information, investment information, and administrative expenses. If the element or transaction does not match the first four elements, then it is not required to be presented in our financial reports, unless it is for non-GAAP purposes such as bond compliance. In some cases, we present bond compliance schedules after all the other schedules, but prior to the statistical section. And this is a very, very common thing to present things like bond compliance and other non-GAAP purpose statements that are presented within our annual financial report. As of GASB 92, and I bet you didn't realize that we now have 92 statements out, but as of the beginning of this month, yes, we do have 92 statements out. Omnibus 2020, we're going to be talking about that in a future webinar, but as of GASB 92, there are 94 required notes to the basic financial statements. And I should know, I have written on every single one of them. For those of you who have access to CCH's Accounting Research Manager, the GASB Disclosure Manual was written by yours truly and contains every single required note by the GASB and examples of the required notes from different types of governments, some of you who may be online today. If I printed out the pages of notes and examples, it would be well over 700 pages long. I'll show you where to find the disclosures manual before the end of the hour if you do happen to have access to the Accounting Research Manager. Now, not all apply to every annual financial report, of course. After all, there may not be OPEB offered by your government, and therefore the OPEB disclosure is not required. There are 13 required elements to the summary of significant accounting policies, but again, if one of the elements is not applicable to your government, it's not disclosed. The accounting policies are supposed to be directly applicable to your situation. Currently, there are 17 other notes that the GASB deems essential, meaning required, to the fair presentation of the financial statements as long as they are applicable. These include cash and investments, capital assets, debt service to maturity, pensions, leases, and OPEB. Finally, there are 64 entity-specific disclosures. These are for specific transactions such as asset retirement obligations, short-term obligations, related party transactions, fund balance classifications, component unit relationships to the primary government, landfill closure, post-closure costs, derivative instruments, and so many others. Some of these are not widely used. I've yet to see any of you prepare a non-monetary transactions disclosure, and frankly, I can't find one online. And there might be a situation, although pretty rare, where a government buys a good or service from a foreign organization and must contract in a foreign currency. And if you did a transaction like that, that is a required disclosure. But that disclosure is different from an investment in a foreign currency. Now, if you do transactions in a foreign currency beyond an investment in a foreign currency, I'd want to talk to you about that. But chances are you don't do many, if at all. Certainly in my career, I don't think I've done one transaction where I've had it denominated in a foreign currency and had to deliver a good or service using a foreign currency translation adjustment. Well, let's break down the notes. What are our significant accounting policies? Here is what is supposed to be in that section. Notice that I bolded a few sections that could be changing once the financial reporting model project is finalized. Now, stay tuned. We have 2 webinars coming up later on this year in August and September when we'll be discussing the financial reporting model. Also, the revenue recognition project may have an impact on the summary significant accounting policies, but farther off into the future. We'll be discussing the GASB's preliminary views on that project coming up in July. And so we have some summer fun together coming up, some of which well into the future may change our summary significant accounting policies. You notice the one I bolded on the right-hand side. For example, the capitalization of assets and the method of computing depreciation, the modified approach in that might be changing a little bit, but who knows? And then on the left-hand side, the description of the government-wide financial statements. And then on the right-hand side, the policy for defining operating and non-operating revenues of proprietary funds. If there was one that I was reasonably certain might change, it's probably the one on the right-hand side, the policy for defining operating and non-operating revenues of proprietary funds. But don't change it as of today. We have to wait until the GASB finalizes things in the financial reporting project coming up next year. Now, here are the other essential notes and what they include. They include things like budgetary disclosure and lease disclosure. And as we know, the lease disclosure is changing over the next reporting cycle due to the implementation of GASB 87. Budgetary disclosure may change also as part of the financial reporting model project. Many others have changed recently, especially due to the implementation of pensions, OPEB debt, and so on. But the vast majority of these will probably not change all that much over the next year or so. The ones on top are certainly the required disclosures about leases, that is changing, and the budgetary data. Stay tuned for that one. We'll be talking about that later on this year. Now that we have the elements of our current note disclosure, what are these things called concept statements as issued by the GASB? Concept statements are not authoritative to preparers and auditors. Now, before all of you hang up, concept statements are very important. The purpose of concept statements is to identify the objectives and fundamental principles of financial reporting that can be applied to address all of our accounting and financial reporting issues. They assist the GASB in considering the merits of alternative approaches to financial reporting and facilitated the development of accounting and financial reporting standards. Concept statements also assist us, preparers, auditors, users, to better understand the concepts underlying accounting and financial reporting standards. I always describe concept statements in comparison to GASB statements sort of like a ranch. At the ranch, we have lots of animals. And those animals, those are the GASB statements, the implementation guide questions, and other pronouncements. The concept statements, well, that's the fence that surrounds the ranch to keep the livestock in. Concept statements truly are the boundaries within which the GASB works. The 6 concept statements establish what's called the conceptual framework for what we include in our basic financial statements, the notes, RSI, and elements to financial reports, including these 6 items: assets, deferred outflows of resources; liabilities, deferred inflows of resources; net position, inflows and outflows. Hang on a second. I got to go back a little bit. Yeah, let's see if we can move this. Can we move the slide back a minute? There we go. Inflows and outflows of resources and other concepts. The concept statements provide many of the definitions of transactions used in GAAP. They provide the objectives, fundamental principles used. They provide the concepts in our reporting, but they do not provide the accounting and financial reporting standards that apply to an individual item or an individual transaction or an individual event. They are the framework to build those transactions, though. Here are the 6 concept statements currently in place. The note disclosure exposure draft only proposes to amend 5 paragraphs in the right-hand corner of Concepts 3. It's also worth noting that the recognition of elements of financial statements exposure draft that will be released later this spring at the same time as the financial reporting model will propose to amend the elements of financial statements in the lower left-hand corner, introducing us to the measurement focus and basis of accounting that will be proposed for governmental funds. Again, stay tuned for our webinars later on this year on the financial reporting model project. Notice also that 2 statements are in the framework on service efforts and accomplishments. For those of us who have been around GAAP for over a decade, remember that SEA might have been an element of disclosure for state and local governments, but so far it's just a concept statement that has been amended. For those of you who engage in performance auditing and reporting, those concept statements provide a great picture of how to gauge how efficient and effective our government is. In many performance audit situations, I refer to them even though they're not authoritative. So take a look in the center there if you happen to issue a performance audit report or a budget. The proposed amendments by the GASB to the conceptual framework for note disclosure focuses on the purpose of notes, the users of the notes, in relating the purpose and users to the criteria for disclosing information in the notes to the basic financial statements. The criteria include the types of information disclosed in the notes to the financial statements, the types of information that are not appropriate to disclose in the notes, in the degree of importance that the information disclosed in the notes should possess. So this is the basics of the proposed framework. The degree of importance is key as the GASB is focusing on a single word, and that word is essential. Essential information is proposed by the GASB to be characterized by the presence of evidence that the information is being utilized in users' analyses for making decisions or assessing accountability, or if the information becomes available, users would modify their analyses for making decisions or assessing accountability to incorporate that information. So this becomes a very important breakpoint. What is the definition of the word essential? To determine the word essentiality, the purpose of the notes and users of the notes of the financial statements need to be known. And GASB discusses the purpose of the notes as providing information that explains, describes, or supplements financial statements and is essential to users in making economic, social, or even political decisions or assessing accountability. Notes to financial statements are integral to the basic financial statements. They are necessary to make the basic financial statements complete. Now, some of us publish financial statements without notes. In us auditors, we modify our reports to show users that the notes were not presented. Because if the notes are not presented, then the financial statements are incomplete. And we need to notify our users to that fact. Now, I mentioned the word users a number of times. The concept of the users is brought into the analyses of whether or not a particular note disclosure is essential. Per the GASB's proposal, users of notes to the financial statements are responsible for obtaining a reasonable understanding of government and public finance activities and of the fundamentals of governmental financial reporting. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to walk down the street and ask a random person what is in your annual financial report. But they have to be a reasonable person to understand the information that's in your financial report. They're also responsible for studying the information with reasonable diligence and applying relevant analytical skills. Again, as a practical matter, the GASB believes that users to the notes to the financial statements are primarily those to whom government is accountable, and that's the citizens. The second piece is those who directly represent the citizens, meaning our legislature or our governing body, and those who lend or who participate in the lending process, such as investors or our lenders if we're dealing directly with a bank. But all of those users who I named need to have some form of reasonable understanding of how we operate. So, based on the proposed update to the purpose and users of the notes of the financial statements, and the criteria for disclosing the information in the notes would include the items on the screen in the examples on this screen and on the next slide. So, for example, more details about or explanation of amounts recognized in the financial statements. Probably, an example of that would be when we disaggregate our receivables or our debt service maturity. Our fund deficit information would be potentially an essential piece of information. These elements on this screen, as well as this next screen, would be things that are included, or in the case of this screen, not included. So take a look here. We're not going to include things that are mainly subjective or speculative or boilerplate. Could that mean that much of the summary of significant accounting policies that is purely educational in nature go away? I'm getting down on my knees and praying on that one. Because these things we carry forward from year to year to year. And it would be a great thing to do is to put up an educational website, and perhaps this is the role of the GASB to do so. I think that at some point, someday, we all hope that a general governmental gap education website is established for us to refer to, and maybe our note disclosure will slim down. And maybe this conceptual framework adjustment will be the impetus to that. So then, knowing what things could be included or excluded, we then need to derive the term essential. The GASB terms essential to convey the degree of importance that each aspect of information should possess. But somehow, some way, to make the decisions on essential notes, evidence needs to be gathered by the GASB on either the note's effectiveness on assessing accountability, or if the information becomes available, users would modify their analyses to make decisions. But it's unclear how the GASB will find those users and then test the essentiality of proposed notes in the future without incurring some testing costs by GASB staff. This doesn't mean that you have to go out and do it. Before the GASB issues a note, they have to go out and do it. So again, this term essential is going to put some work on the GASB as to whether or not a note is essential, assuming this framework goes forward. Of course, in our current financial reporting model, the notes include information by reporting units. We know these more by the government-wide statements, our major funds, non-major funds in the aggregate, and our discretely presented component units. The GASB is proposing that the information contained in the notes to the financial statements include descriptions, explanations, and details about the financial position, changes in financial position, or cash flows of the reporting units of government. Notes to financial statements at a minimum would provide information that corresponds to all these reporting units presented in the financial statements. Whether that changes the disclosure of discretely presenting component unit notes in the future will likely need to be addressed by the GASB if this goes forth. But for now, don't change anything until the GASB tells you to do it, unless it's something that really should not have been presented in a prior manner. So now it's your turn. Comments on the proposal are due to the GASB on April 17th. There will be a public hearing on the proposal Sunday, May 17th at GFOA in New Orleans. The GASB does take comments seriously from all respondents and heavily uses the information from public hearings. And as it says here on the screen, a conference call will be available. Personally, I'll be calling in because it's my grandson's first birthday that day. So there's no way I'm going to be in attendance. I'm going to his birthday party to see him smash a cake. So what's the next step for the GASB? The staff takes weeks to assemble this information, and they'll make recommendations to the board as part of the redeliberation process. The GASB hopes to issue a final concept statement amendment by about a year from now. After that, it's a bit of a big guess as to when and how current standards may be updated. Future standards will apply the final framework, but the existing 94 disclosure elements are what I'm sure you all care about. Will that change in the future? I certainly hope so. Frankly, our financial statements are too long. They're way longer than, say, Walmart's financial statements or the biggest corporation's financial statements. And frankly, there is some stuff that we can do now to change things. We might not even need to wait for the GASB for us to take a fresh look. You can do a lot now. You don't have to wait. Here's some of the low-hanging fruit. First, look for notes that only relate to a prior implementation or bond issuance in non-comparative financial statements that don't make a lot of sense for this year. So for example, let's say you're still disclosing a bond sale that happens to be outstanding from 2004. Chances are nobody's really making a decision on, hey, we sold some bonds in 2004. Now, obviously, you need a debt service schedule, and that's absolutely essential. And once you disclose the debt service schedule for that 2004 bond sale as part of your other debt service schedule, you're probably done. But disclosing the terms and conditions of the bond sale that was issued in 2004 probably doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense in 2020. Look for obvious typographical errors or clarifications that can be made. There isn't a day that doesn't go by that I don't open up something that I had written, either in a CCH guide or a CCH practice manual or an article that I've written or even an old annual financial report where I open a random page and sure enough there's a typo there. And don't worry, look at it now with a fresh set of eyes before the auditors get there. Look for obvious typographical errors and maybe clarifications that you can do today. Ask your governing board or board of governance to determine what note disclosure not specifically required by existing GAAP that they use. If it's not specifically required by GAAP or they don't use it, why is it in the notes? And when I was a preparer, I used to do this all the time. After each CAFR release, I used to go over and talk to my House and Senate Ways and Means committees and say, what do you think? And I know what you're saying. They probably didn't say anything and they wanted a full briefing, and that's true. But I walked through the notes with them and asked them to think about whether or not something from this year that is not required by GAAP should be required next year. And sure enough, every year we slimmed down our notes just a little bit. And of course, we had to add more stuff into our notes because of new GASB standards. But every year we went through that editorial process. Look for notes included that are clearly copied from a peer government that do not apply to your government. I tend to see a lot of inventory disclosure like that. If inventory is not material, then why have a table of inventory purchases and uses? If it's not material, don't bother. Finally, if you're not part of the GFOA Certificate of Achievement in Financial Reporting program, you may want to consider it for the future. It's a good program to get your government compliant with current GAAP. The disclosure checklist is long and for general purpose governments, as most of you might be, it has to be a pretty lengthy document. Remember, there are 94 required elements, so that checklist is very, very long. You can also look at component unit disclosure. On these two slides, these are the requirements for the summary significant accounting policies on component units and how to decide what to include and what not to include. It really comes down to professional judgment on a component unit by component unit basis. Pensions and OPEB, though, should be disclosed if they are paid for by and through the primary government. But if you take a look at the particular elements on these two slides, and I'm going to go back actually one slide here, there's not much that's required by the primary government regarding component units. All you need is a brief description of the component units and their relationship to the primary government. Notice I said the word brief in bold and underline. Get to the point. You also need to discuss the rationale for including each component unit in the financial reporting entity and whether it's discretely presented, blended, or included in the fiduciary fund financial statements. Now, a best practice to this could be setting up a table, especially if you happen to have a lot of component units. The last time I was a preparer, I had 61 separate component units, and I had a pretty lengthy table that said the discussion of the rationale and whether or not it was audited in accordance with generally accepted government auditing standards, and whether or not it was discretely presented or blended or included in fiduciary fund financial statements. Now, that was 10 years ago, but you can do the same thing if you happen to have a lot of discretely presented component units or blended component units. Again, you need to include information about how the separate financial statements for the individual component units may be obtained. Could you include a website link? Sure, but you need to maintain those links. And of course, people change their websites all the time. As the notes in the RSI are integral parts, they should distinguish between the primary government and that of the discretely presented component units. Only include the essential notes and describe that relationship. Other note disclosure is a matter of professional judgment and do it on a component unit by component unit basis. So for example, when I was a preparer, I really only included the debt disclosure because in many situations our discretely presented component units had supporting funds from our primary government. And as such, we included the debt disclosure. And so I say here as an example, if the debt is not issued by a major component, then no debt disclosure is required. So consider each and every component unit before copying and pasting everything into your financial statements. So where do I find more information on note disclosure? And how do I find the disclosure manual? If you happen to have access to CCH's Accounting Research Manager, it's in the lower left-hand corner. And it says it right there, Disclosures Manual. Every single note disclosure required by the GASB is in that link. Now notice a little above that, if you move up to the left here, it says the word GASB. And if you click on the word GASB, within there is the GASB's codification. In codification section 2300 contains every single note disclosure required by the GASB. Doesn't contain all the examples, it only contains a few of them. but it is updated every single year. And it even includes a outline of what the note disclosure order should be, but that's not authoritative. The codification, by the way, again, is updated every year from the GASB, but I think you need to subscribe to it. Also, under here in the lower left-hand corner is the GFOA link, and that GFOA checklist is contained there on their website as well. So there's a lot of information out there for you. If you don't have access to Accounting Research Manager, but want to get the GFOA checklist, here's the link right there. It's www.gfoa.org. So with that, we have a little bit of time for questions and answers. Complexity of governmental financial reporting and so on has gone well beyond what our citizens, in many cases governing board, can grasp with reasonable diligence. It seems like this ED is focusing on a narrow part. Are you aware of the GASB contemplating the larger perspective of users understanding financial reporting? Yes, that is part of deciding what the framework is. Rather than going through all existing GASB standards and choosing willy-nilly as to which note disclosure is most essential for the users of the financial statements, they wanted to create a framework first. And the diligence that once the framework is completed, the diligence that the GASB staff is going to have to do to decide what is the note disclosure of the future, what it's going to look like, will include making an assessment of users. And it could be that the users of our financial statements will slim down in terms of our overall financial reporting. Does that mean that there's a place for popular reporting and similar? Absolutely. But as we all know, even current popular reporting doesn't have any note disclosure in it, or very, very slim note disclosure in it. And maybe that's the second track that they might go down. So another question popped up: what's the proposed expected timing of these statements? Well, the GASB is probably going to approve the conceptual framework in 2021. And then from there, later on in 2021, maybe into 2022, they'll establish a project plan to take a look at existing note disclosure and future note disclosure. Now, obviously, future note disclosure, they'll do that with each new GASB standard, but existing note disclosure, they're going to have some form of process to go through to fit to the framework, and assuming the framework actually passes. But assuming it does, it might take them a year or two to actually go through each and every note disclosure and say, okay, this is essential, this is not essential. Here's hoping in my mind that things like non-monetary transactions probably doesn't need to be disclosed. That's my own personal opinion. So the timing, we're probably talking maybe 2024, 2025 by the time it's all done. Now, for some of you, that may say, hey, wait a second, I'm going to be retired by then. And who knows, maybe many of us would be. But this is something that's really important. It's really about how we communicate to our users. After all, isn't that what we're here for? Join us for our next webinar. We're having, I think, one coming up in April. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Talk to you all in April, and let's all take care of ourselves out there and be diligent and don't be afraid. With that, have a great afternoon.